Hey everyone, welcome to the Building Excellence podcast. I've got a good friend, Nate Muse, with me today. Thanks for being here, Nate.
Yeah, glad to be here, Bailey.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, you're in Greenville, South Carolina, but give us some context in growing up and what life was like for you growing up.
Yeah, I grew up in the Greenville area. I was born in Georgia, but grew up in Greenville, and so I consider myself a Greenvillian. But grew up in a pastor's home, so I'm a PK. Grew up playing athletics, baseball, basketball, golf. So church was a big part of my life. Athletics, that was a big part of my life. And actually stayed in the area and attended Furman University. Graduated from there in 2008, which is a long time ago. But it's just been amazing to watch the city of Greenville grow. I love the city. That's why I stay here, contrary to what Bailey tries to convince me to do, to move out to where he's at. But it's just it's a great place to live. Growing a family here. I've got a wife, and we just had our second kid. Got a 3-year-old and now a 4-month old. So life's good in Greenville.
Yeah, Greenville, I'll say Greenville is a great place to live. Getting to live there for a little bit. Tulsa's a great place to live though too. So if
I
you ever
was
wanted
say
to move out,
you better take your own advice there, buddy.
yeah. Well, talk about a little bit growing up. You're playing sports. You're always involved in the church because your dad was a pastor. Did you have any particular experiences that kind of helped shape you as you moved into your kind of your adolescence?
Not necessarily. When I think back to my experience growing up, especially in athletics and the church, I don't think about specific experiences. I think about specific relationships.
Mm,
That's where I feel like God has blessed me in the area of relationships. And it was not necessarily one specific coach or one specific experience that was very formational for me, but it was a combination of the relationships that God allowed in my life to make me the person that I am today. And that happens sometimes in the context of athletics. That's happened sometimes in the context of the church. But regardless, I am who I am today because of the relationships I have.
yeah. Well, that's kind of a common pattern that we see throughout, the podcast and just a lot of different people is the relationship component because we are wired to have relationships with other people. But how do you go about building really solid relationships? I know sometimes it's organic, sometimes it's more intentional. But do you have any advice in how to go about developing solid relationships?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, sometimes relationships are easier to pursue than others. Some relationships are. But I really believe that relationships are formed when there's deep connection happening. And you think about the relationships that you have. Some of them revolve around work, some of them revolve around church, some of them revolve around athletics. But uh, and some of the conversation I've been having lately with some of my friends, coaches, pastors, we've been talking a lot about pursuing relationship and connection outside of work or outside of a general structure. How are you getting to know someone else based on where that person is in life? Not about what they can do for you or not about what they're working on or what goal they're trying to achieve, but how are you connecting with a person, with an individual that God has made in his image. And I think that when we pursue connection with other people, that it will deepen our compassion for them. Like that's what I've been seeing a lot is that when I connect with someone else relationally, when I find out where they're at, what God is doing in their heart, what God is doing in their life, it grows my compassion for them. So I would say that just pursuing connection. Uh, there's a there's questions that I like to ask people when I'm sitting down with them, like what are you experiencing right now that is a high in your life? What's a low that you've experienced lately? What's something you're learning? Uh, what's something that you have felt, and what's something that I can help you with? Like if you sit down with a person and you go through those 5 questions, you're gonna achieve deep connection with that person, and you're gonna experience a different relational level than you had before with them, and you're gonna grow in compassion for them. So I would say that you have to be intentional a lot of times, and that goes in the home, that goes outside of the home, because we all have our hamster wheel, right? We
Mhm.
all have our hamster wheel that we get on, and we ask the typical questions: how is your day, what's going on? But when you move past that level into intimacy, I think that's when you see deep connection, and I think that's when you see love and compassion grow for others.
Yeah, and I think to go with what you just said, there's also a genuine authenticity, like
Yep.
being naturally curious,
Yes.
and having questions not about what you can get from that other person, but more so just a genuine interest in people.
Yep. And you
And
think about this, Bailey, like, how often when we go into a relation, when we go into like a conversation with someone, how often are we thinking about, hey, like I need this person to do something, or I have this agenda, or I have this goal or thing that I'm going after. Like, what about putting that aside for a moment and just connecting with a person just to connect with a person?
hmm
Like that is that is counterintuitive for us, and sometimes that's a little bit uncomfortable for us because that's not natural.
yeah,
So I 100% agree of just connecting intimately with someone, connecting with someone else, just to say, hey, like I see you,
hmm
I see where you're at, I see what you're going through, and I want to know you more. Like that. That's where I think connection happens.
yeah, and it's interesting. I'm just thinking of this as you say all that stuff, but as we're growing up, we develop relationships through sports, through school, and sometimes it is a little bit transactional if you're in a group that you want to get in with the cool kids or all these different factors, especially in school when you're growing up. But at the same time, it's more authentic because there's not a lot of, you're not doing a lot of ton of give and take. When you get in the professional world, it's always about what do you do? You know, what are you doing? And there's that transaction component of it. So if you can set that aside and
Yeah.
just get to know people for who they are, it makes a big difference in terms of your relationships, how you view people, authenticity, and actually getting to kind of dive into who they are as a person and what they
Mhm.
care about. Um, and so that is a big component in developing relationships too. It's just kind of interesting to think about, you know, as we grow throughout um, our years to see the differences in how people interact with each other. And so anyway, it's just, but you talked about sports. You talked about playing sports and growing up in school and the church, and you have these relationships that you developed.
Yep.
Um, you know, what sports did you play? And I know I always ask that question because typically, you know, sometimes always someone is playing sports or they're involved in some type of academic thing that they're involved with people. And so there's experiences in there that um,
Mhm.
allow people to grow with other people, allow people to grow within who they are as a person.
Yeah.
And so, what sports did you play? I already know, but what tell the audience what sports you played and how that was impactful in your life and kind
Yep.
of led the trajectory of what you did and went into.
Sure. So I grew up playing baseball. I played baseball from the age of 5 to about 12. And honestly, I thought that was going to be my sport.
That's when you got drafted by the Braves at
Yes,
12, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And I refused the contract saying, hey, like I want to go develop in college. I'm just kidding. No, that
Too
didn't
much
happen.
money.
Yeah, I had too much money. There you go. So I played baseball, then decided to like put that in the back seat, so to speak, because I fell in love with basketball so much. And that really had a huge influence in my life, and especially like post college, what I decided to do career wise for just a little bit. But it was an important point in my life, choosing like basketball over baseball. Um, and that led me to a job post college, and then actually kind of in a strange way to what I'm doing today, volunteer wise up at Furman.
Yeah. Well, so what did you do after college?
So I was the DOps for a year, and that looked like doing everything that none of the other coaches wanted to do. It was just like an entry level job. It's like a glorified grad assistant where you're doing a lot of the administrative work. You're doing travel, you're doing meals, you're doing film exchange, a lot of the administrative duties of a college basketball program. And I did that for a year. And I was sure after I graduated from college that I wanted to go into college coaching. I wanted to be an assistant, I wanted to recruit. Eventually, I wanted to be a head coach. Um, but about 6 or 7 months in, I realized pretty quickly that like the values that I had, based on the type of family person, the family man that I wanted to be. I want to have a family. I want to have a wife, um, and I wanted to be there for my family. And I'm not saying that guys in college coaching can't be there for my family, but I knew that the way that I was wired, like I was not going to be able to be the family man that I wanted to be and be a basketball coach at the same time. And that was a really hard realization, because you have these lofty goals, you have these lofty dreams about where you want to go and what you want to do. And so there's part of you that is like, there's tension inside, because yes, I want to do that, but I know that I can't. And I made the decision of like, I don't think I can do both. And that's fine. I think that, especially, I mean, I was 23 at the time, and it's good to have that conversation with yourself at the age of 23 instead of, 33, when
Hmm.
you've been in it for 10 or 11 years. But shortly after that, I remember I finished out the year. Went into my coach's office that I was working for, kind of told him where I was, and what I believed was the next step at the time. And he was kind of surprised, but obviously he was fine with it. And I stepped away from basketball after being in it for a year as the Dobo, as the
Hmm.
Diops.
Yeah, and before that, you were involved with the Furman basketball team before,
Yeah,
and you get.
that's really what got me into it. Was I was a manager for 4 years with the team, and that in itself is a really cool experience. Probably another conversation for another day, because all of the stories and people that you meet and the places you go, like that's invaluable. Like that experience, especially while you're in college, 18 to 22, like to be able to experience some of the things that I experienced. I feel like I could write a book, but and I'll always look back on those times, those memories really well and really fondly. Um, but it's so interesting too to see that, like, even when you think that you're done with something, when you think that you are done in an area or a sector, um, later in life you look back and you're like, I never was done. That's just where God was like taking me through to prepare me for where I'm at today. And so like it's not the way that I like to say it is like, when in our journey of faith, when God is working in our lives, when He's taking us to different places and allowing us to meet different people, nothing's wasted. Nothing is wasted. Like He uses everything, every ounce of opportunity that we have, and every experience that we go through. He's using that to not only like change us inside and change our hearts, but to prepare us for something that He has for us down the road. And that's the biggest lesson I learned from my time in basketball. The short 1 year that I had professionally as a DOps.
Sure, sure, but it's kind of tail turn, and you're back in basketball a little bit,
Yeah.
for
Yeah. And
sure.
yeah. And so that's been really neat, because my conversation with my coach was, hey, coach, I don't feel like I'm wired for this. This is what I feel like I'm wired for. And it was ministry. And so he asked me, he's like, so what are you doing? Do you have a job? Like, and I told him, I was like, no, I don't have a job. Like this is just what I sense in my heart, that I'm wired to do ministry. And so he was kind of confused, honestly.
Yeah.
And he was like, all right, good luck. And shortly after, about a year in, I got an opportunity to be a youth pastor. And so I'm doing the church thing. I'm leading a youth group. And then a guy gets the job at Furman, the head coaching job at Furman, who I had a chance to work with when I was a manager. And he sat down with me and he said, hey, Nate, I want to reconnect you with the program, because I know your deal. I know that you're a pastor. I know how you think. And I think that these guys need someone as just an objective sounding board. And I want you to come in like a chaplain role. So I started that in, gosh, I can't remember when Nico got to Furman, but it was several years ago. Nico succeeded, he moved on, and then Coach Ritchie came in, and he's the head coach at Furman now. And he actually sat me down as soon as he got the job. He's like, hey, I know you're involved, but I want you even more involved. So I'm the chaplain for the Furman basketball team. I meet with coaches, I meet with players. I'm there to help them out emotionally, spiritually, whatever, in whatever way they need. I feel like I've been in their shoes, I've been in their seat. So I know, especially like the coaches and the players. And so that's really interesting how God takes both of those elements and combines them into one experience. And so now I'm able to talk to them from a place that they understand. And so we meet, we do Bible studies together. I meet one on one with guys, and I'm just around the program just to be there to help. And so again, all comes full circle. Like what God was doing several years ago. Yes, it mattered in the moment, but now, like what God is working and growing and developing, like He was preparing me all along for this position that He's graciously given me now as the chaplain for the basketball team. And I, you know what, I could not do this job today if I had not had the experience I had then. And
Hmm.
that's the common theme that I see in my life is that God is when you feel like you're wandering aimlessly, when you're like, hey, I don't know if I'm making the right decision, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. When you feel like you're wandering aimlessly, that does not mean that God is not working purposefully. And He's so patient in it, you know, like He is. You're like, hey, I want that now. I think that I want to get there right now, and I'm not where I want to be, God. But God's just so patient and incrementally bringing us along in the plan that He has for us, and that's why we can trust Him. You know, He knows best. He knows us better than we know ourselves, and because of that, like He's going to prepare us in the pace that we need for what He has for us.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen, you're already getting a little taste of why some of these coaches have wanted you to be on the staff and just help the guys, the staff along, and you can obviously see that, and you're wired to do that. But going back on your experiences, taking a leap of faith, stepping out of basketball, trusting that what you were hearing was God telling you, hey, I think maybe it's time to take a step in this direction. You did that instead of just saying, I don't know if I should do that. I need to stick in basketball and just keep on going and not really listen to that little still small voice.
Mhm.
But also to the point of you getting opportunities whenever, let's just say, Coach Medved came back in, that would not have happened had you not have done a good job in the roles that you were in,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So it wasn't like you just kind of like did an okay job and didn't have good relational skills with people, didn't care about other people, because I think naturally for you, you really care about people. You want to
Yeah.
understand what makes them tick. You want to understand how you can help them become better. And
Mhm.
so even if you were a manager at the time, whatever time you met Nico, which I think was even your freshman year,
Yep, that's
and not
correct.
only Nico, but the rest of the staff too. So, but that opportunity came back around because you did a good job, you
Yeah.
know, however many years before.
Yep.
So that's a lesson in itself of just doing a good job wherever you are.
Yeah.
And that's a common theme we see as well. It's just
Mhm.
doing a good job where you are with what you have and being good to people and treating people the right way. So,
That's
um,
exactly right, and I think that that's a great point that you're making because when I think back over my life, over my life, was I thinking about the future? Absolutely, we all do. But in moments where you are the most joyful and you are the most content is when you're just simply doing what you know to do. Like what am I doing with the day that God has given me and the opportunity that God has given me and the people that God has put in front of me. Like what am I doing with all of that today in this moment? And I get questions from people all the time about, hey, like I have this decision to make. I have this I need to do because I want to get there. And so I come back at them and I'm like, hey, what do you have today? What do you have in front of you? What do you have in front of you today that you know to do and that you can do it well and you can do it excellently and you can do it with character and integrity. Do that with everything you've got. And you know what? The results will take care of itself. Like God, if you believe, if you trust that God has your best interests at heart, that God is working for your good, then you can do whatever's in front of you today well. Just do that.
yeah, no, that's such a good point.
Yeah.
Because if you do just focus on a day, do it with excellence, do it with integrity and character, the results will follow,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
and the point too that I know it's a cliche and people say it all the time, but we don't know if we do have tomorrow.
Mhm.
So if we don't truly know that we have tomorrow, to remember that each day and focus on what's important now. Like, the Lou Holtz deal, win. What's important now, right?
Yeah, and that's we just had this conversation with some of the coaches up at Furman. Is the question I asked them is like, at the end of the day, when you lay your head on your pillow at night, and can you ask yourself this question and answer honestly? Did I exhaust every possibility and opportunity that God has given me today? Like, am I exhausted in the best possible way? That's the way to think about it. It's not in a way of like, am I just worn out and stressed out? No, like, did I give everything that God has given me today? Did I breathe out everything that God has breathed into me today? And I think that if we can ask ourselves that question at the end of every day, and answer that honestly, yes, like we're gonna live a fulfilled life.
Yeah. So, what about for people that maybe are not in a profession or a job that they like, and they sit there and they hear that, and you're like, well, I'm trying to do a good job, but I don't have the energy or the passion, or, I do the best I can, but I just don't have that natural drive in me to do that on a daily basis. What would you advise someone in that position?
I think there's a couple questions that we can think about. One, like what makes you tick as a person? I think that sometimes when I find myself worn out, which we all do, even in the professions that we love, we are worn out. We get exhausted. We get stressed. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that sometimes when I find myself there, I'm disconnected from me. And what I mean by that is like the way that God has wired me. There are certain activities or things that I need to do, that I haven't been doing, that disconnect me from me emotionally and me spiritually. So am I I'll just give you a couple of examples. Like for me, that looks like setting aside some time to just play music. Like if I play the piano, if I play the guitar, like that does something emotionally inside of me that almost like either rewires me or re-energizes me. So I would say that's the first thing. um, I'm disconnected from me, but the second thing is I may be disconnected from someone else. And I think that isolation is one of um, the biggest tools that the enemy uses against us in our life, to where we take a step back and we're looking just by ourselves at our life, what's going on, and we start thinking, hey, I'm not where I want to be, things aren't going the way that I want to go, and all of that is happening individually because I'm not connected. So like, who do you have in your life right now that can encourage you and then challenge you? Like those are the people that you need to be running to. Like, so first I would say connect to yourself, connect to the way that you're wired. For some people, I know for you, Bailey, that it means like getting outside, it means driving, looking at the mountains, enjoying God's creation, something like that. Like, connect with you, connect the way that God has wired you to enjoy his world. But then secondly, connect with someone else that can maybe see the picture more clearly than you can in that moment. So connect with you and connect with someone else.
Yeah, because we're getting into faith, but God has uniquely gifted us with different gifts, talents, and abilities, and so understanding what those are, like having a self-evaluation, understanding what makes you tick, that's so important. Because if you're in a role of things, there's a guy named Dave Jewett who you've not gotten a chance to meet, but he's got an organization called Your One Degree, which is helping you focus basically out of 360 degrees in life. You have your one degree and focusing on those things.
Yeah.
And so what that does is when you understand who you are, first off, whose you are, but then who you are, that helps you understand yourself,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then when you understand the abilities that you have, the natural giftedness that you have, and you can find a way to naturally do those things within your work,
Mhm.
or even if you don't have a job that allows you to do that, find things outside of your work that enable you to have that, like you were talking about,
Yep.
whether it be driving through the mountains, whether it be connecting with people. I mean, whether it be reading a book,
Yeah.
listening to music. I mean, there's so many things for different people that allow them to feel fulfilled. So there's like greens, yellows, and reds. And when you're in jobs that have more of yellows and reds, that would be something to think about. Like, okay, well, how can I get uh, what I'm doing in more of a greens area and capacity? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody, I mean, not many people at least, figure out what they want to do in their first job, or even their second job, or even
Mm-hmm.
their job after that. And so like understanding, like that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Like that is part of the process of like, hey, like there's certain elements about this job that I like. Like for me, like it was, I love the people side of it. I love the relationship side of it. I love the personal development side of it. I loved all of those things about basketball. But then I looked at the time and I was like, I can't do that. And that's good. That is good. If you can come to that conclusion, then that's healthy. And connecting with yourself and then connecting with someone else will help you to more clearly see it and more clearly understand that. The way you said it exactly right. The way that I say it is, if I understand my purpose, like the way that I'm wired, what God has gifted me to do and given me the ability to do, it's going to affect the place. It's going to affect the place that I want to live out that purpose. And then guess what that informs? That informs my practice, right? So it informs the way that I learn. It informs the way that I grow and the way that I develop and grow into the purpose that God has for my life. But it all starts with understanding my purpose. Like, what has God gifted me to do and given me the ability to do? And sometimes that happens by like understanding the way that we're wired, but sometimes it happens by understanding the context that we don't want to work in or that we can't work in, and that's fine. Understanding that and coming to that realization, that's healthy.
Yeah, it's just constant refinement. It's
Yep.
constant refinement, right?
Yep.
It's a
Yep.
process, like you said.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's great. So let's go into real quick because I love what we're talking about. You got to work, if we're going to start talking about leadership, you got to work with a lot of great coaches on that staff at Furman that you were with, and then being around Bob and his staff, and being around Nico and his staff. So that's where I met you, is whenever I came on and got to work with Nico and that staff. And there was a lot of great coaches
Yeah.
in those meetings, in those rooms, coaching the guys. Um, what have you learned? Let's go back, because I think the first staff you're on, who was the head coach at Furman at the time?
Larry Davis was the head coach, and he had come from Minnesota, and I think it was the 1997 Final Four team that he was an assistant on. So he came to Greenville from Minnesota, and so it was Larry Davis.
Okay. And then you had Nico Medved, who's now the head coach at Colorado State.
Correct.
You had at one point, wasn't Mike Boynton was
Yep.
on the staff, right?
Yep.
Or as
Yeah,
as a
he
GA,
was.
right? Or graduate
Yeah, yeah.
manager.
So he had just graduated my freshman year. He had just graduated from South Carolina. And as I was getting as I was getting to know these coaches, the staff, they were like, "Hey, yeah, we got another guy who just graduated from," and you know, growing up around South Carolina, you know, you're familiar with South Carolina basketball, so you know Mike Boynton, and they're like, "It's Mike Boynton." Oh my goodness, that's legit. He's famous in the state, and so he came in, and I'm telling you, like, uh, I was going to mention this earlier, but the most people the people that have impacted me the most are the ones that when they're the most important person in the room and they talk to you, they make you feel like the most important person in the room, right?
hmm
That's Mike Boynton. Mike Boynton has been like that from day one, from the first day that I know him, that I got to meet him. And I was telling you this on the phone a while back. I was listening to an interview because he's the head coach at Oklahoma State now. I was listening to an interview with him recently, and I'm telling you, he's the same person now that he was then. And that says a lot about who he is. So yeah, Mike Boynton was another guy that was just the GA at the time, and now he's the head coach at Oklahoma State, which is pretty wild.
Yeah. And then you think about Bob Ritchie, who's now the head coach at Furman. Jay McCauley's now the head coach at Wofford.
Yeah,
You got to be around a lot of guys, and I'm sure I mentioned some that you've also been around too. And there's a lot of great assistants too.
yeah,
DP is a great one at Wofford now. And so anyway, but what are some things you learned from each person? You just talked about Coach Boynton and how he was true to himself, no matter if he's a GA or a head coach, is what you said. But that's a great lesson itself. But what are some of the leadership lessons you've learned from Bob and these guys that you've been around?
yeah. So it's interesting because you have one occupation, but you have different personalities living out that occupation, right? Like each guy is going to do it differently, and that's encouraging. That I think that goes for any sector that we're in, right? That someone is going to do the same job differently than another person. But you can learn how to do that job differently based on personalities, and that's healthy. So I would say that when you think about when you think about the men that have succeeded in this profession, I think the common theme throughout all of them is the desire to develop others. Like that's why coaches are coaches, I think, at the end of the day. The ones that succeed, the ones that stay true to themselves long term, are the ones that say, "Hey, like I'm going to meet people where they're at, and I'm not going to leave them there." Like that is, I think, the common theme that runs throughout all of uh, college coaching or successful college coaching success, as I define it. And the way that that plays itself out is differently. Like for example, like um, I was looking at some of the questions that you were sending my way, thinking about like coaches that have had great influence in my life. And I was thinking about Bob Ritchie. Like I've worked with him, but I've never like played for him or worked for him. But I was thinking about the way that Bob does life. There are very few people in this world that attack what they're doing head on with everything they've got, and Bob Ritchie's one of them. And so I've learned just to bring a different level of motivation and focus everything focus on in everything and into everything. I've learned that from Bob, and that's something that that I lack. But when I'm around Bob, like I feel like it is contagious. So whatever I'm doing, because of relationship, because of connection, when I walk away from a conversation with Bob, or I walk away from interaction with Bob, I'm more focused automatically. But then you have other people like Jay McCauley, who is focused. Yes, absolutely. Like he's determined, but he is so relational. And when you sit down with Jay, you say, "Oh my goodness, like I feel really good about myself. I feel really good about life." And so you take that snippet and you're like, "Hey, how can I implement that in my life, in the area that I'm in, and what I'm doing in church and in ministry?" So these guys are all succeeding, but they're doing it in different ways. And so I think that should encourage us, right? Wherever we are, like there's a way that we should do it, and that may be different than the guy in the lane next to me. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have success because we're doing it. We're not going to have success because we're doing it differently than the guy next to me. Like success is defined as like, hey, are you excellently pursuing the God-given call on your life and purpose today with everything you've got? And if you can say yes to that, guess what? You're doing it with excellence.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a leader, you're sitting there and you're getting to watch all these different coaches, and whether it's in coaching or in business, once you get an opportunity to be a head coach or to be a business leader, which everyone is a leader in some capacity, you get to sit here and watch people and learn. And then in a similar context, what we talked about, understanding yourself, you get to sit here and take the things that you do well, or ideas and things like that, and then funnel them into your own way of leadership, right? That's
Yep.
unique to you. That's not trying to mimic someone else, but it's unique to yourself, because people want to follow people that are authentic to themselves rather than someone that's trying to be somebody else. And so
100%.
obviously being on staff with those guys and Coach Medved, uh, they're all unique, but they all are themselves in their own capacity,
That's
right?
a great way to put it.
And I think that's what makes all of them so great. They're very self-driven, self-motivated people that they know where they're going, yet they're always focused on the moment too.
Yep.
And so it's fun to watch and see those guys have success, but you get to see and understand why they have success and the relational component of it, and the leadership, and trying to make the guys that they coach better people, trying to make the staff that they work with better men and husbands and fathers. And I think all those guys try to do that.
Yep.
They try to add value to the people that they're around every single day. So as a leader, if you can take one thing away, definitely take that, because it's something that works in business, works in ministry, works in coaching, works in your family life.
Mhm.
All those things go hand in hand. So
Yeah, and
um,
I think that that's the first step for anybody that wants to lead or do things well. Like the first step to self-actualization is self-realization, right? Like of understanding, like this is who I am. And you know, especially in ministry, like I'll just be honest with you, like early on, like you would watch guys online, or you would listen to guys speak and you're like, I want to be that person. I want to be that person. I want to be that person. And so like the next time you would teach, you would sound like that person. And then you're like, no, I don't really want to sound like, I want to sound like, and then the next time you teach it. And so that's, I'm not saying that's bad, but what I'm saying is like, I was neglecting me in the process. But in that process, like I was finding me, and today, like when I sit down to teach or speak or communicate, like I'm looking at it from my perspective. And you know what? That's okay. Like if there's anybody that people want me to be, it's me. It's not another person. Like they want me to be me. And wherever God has put me, that's enough. And I need to be okay with that. So understanding first, hey, realizing this is who I am. This is who God has made me to be. That's going to affect everything that I do after. And so like if there's anything that you can focus on, it's identity and who I am, because that's going to lead into what you do.
Yeah. And talk about, identity and today it's very tough, especially whether you're growing up or you're in a work environment or you're an athlete, you're a coach. It's really easy to not truly want to be yourself, but want to fit in or fit into what the other people might put you in a box as a coach, as an athlete, as a person. How do you stay out of that and overcome maybe the idea behind trying to fit into something someone else wants you to be?
Yeah, every day I honestly think about the world that my kids are growing up in, and I think about social media presence. I think about the things that we view and see on TV every day, and there's just this image that everybody's like, hey, you got to fit into this. And I just being honest, working with young people, man, like this is this is uh this is a hard reality, because I think I see more and more people getting disconnected from their reality each and every day. And so um I hate to use this language, but like what is the thing that centers me back to like who I am? And I think that sometimes like we have to think about the things that we're running to and the things that are causing us to think about certain things. Like, and that is like social media. Like, am I defined by who I am on social media? Am I defined by who others are on social media? And if I'm not careful in limiting my time and limiting even my thoughts, like what I'm thinking, how I'm processing about what I'm seeing, then I might start to live like someone else or try to fit into this mold as someone else would present it. And that goes for even in the relationships or the workplace, right? Like you see someone, you're like, hey, they're successful. And so I want to try to be like that. What does that do? That disconnects us more from who we are. And so I think it goes back to understanding how we're wired, how we're created. Like, have you taken a giftings test? Have you taken a personality test? Like all of those things help center us back to this is who I am. But the more we think, like as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Like the more we think about, like this is what I want to be, or this is what I should be. Maybe I should put it that way. Maybe this is what I should be. Like that's going to disconnect us from more from who we are. So I would say, like for me, it looks like limiting my social media activity. Um, I think that I have a tendency sometimes to pace myself based on other people's pace. And we want people in our lives that are going to push us, but we also need to understand that God has different things for others than he does for us sometimes. And he moves at a different pace in our life than he does in others' life. And so again, I think it all comes down to that question again, Bailey. Am I doing am I exhausting every possibility and opportunity that God has given me today? I think that if we can come back to that question each and every day, that's going to keep us on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's so good because when you're focused on that each day, you can sit down at night and understand like, hey, that's all I can do. I did
Absolutely.
all I can do. It's like when you play in athletics, if you're playing on a team or you're playing yourself or you're coaching, and your guys gave it all they had, or you gave it all you had. At the end of the day, that's all you can do. I mean,
Right.
there's things you're gonna look at and figure out how you can be better at, but at the
Sure.
same time, like You gave it all you had. That's the best you could do that day. With
Yep.
all the preparation you did before, that's the best you could do. If the other team wins, if the opponent wins, that's fine because you can sleep at night saying, "Hey, I gave my best effort." Um, and so I think that's a really important lesson itself. Like when you lay down at night, that's what you should focus on.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So, well, hey, I want to talk about a little bit. Like I was just talking about growth as a person.
Mhm.
You know, what are some of the ways? When we think about growth, I think about challenge, I think about crisis, I think about being in the fire, like those types of things. Really, how do you let those things allow you to grow, or because sometimes those things allow you to grow, or they kind of push you backwards. So, how do you use those things, crises, challenges, opportunity as opportunities to grow?
Yeah, I think that first thing about crisis and trial is I say this to a lot of people that are working their way through a difficult time because this is what I've seen in my own life. Like we find out what's inside of us when the heat is turned up, right? Like that's what is revealed on the inside of us. And so, like if we're walking through something difficult and we're not walking through it in the way that we want to, then like we have to come to the table and say, what are some things that can help me respond differently, that will grow me, that will change me, and use this as an opportunity for growth, not to stunt my growth or not to just keep me where I'm at. I think to Paul's instruction to Timothy, like when Paul is talking to Timothy, who's a young pastor, he's going through a really difficult time. He talks about he takes him back to his calling. He takes him back to the purpose that uh, Paul and others have spoken into his life. He talks about Scripture. He talks about the way that he is spiritually wired, and he says, immerse yourself in those things so that your progress may be evident to all. So I think that like when we're going through difficult times, like do we have healthy processes and do we have uh, healthy habits um, that will grow us? And the crazy thing about it, Bailey, is like when you think about your life and you think about formation and you think about growth, very rarely do you think about the easy times, right? Like it was the times that were tough. It was the unexpected things where God used that. God allowed you to walk through that in order to make you to be the person that He's made you to be. And I think that change cannot happen without struggle. Like change can't happen without struggle. Like that's the pathway that change and growth happens is through struggle. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is like, we can go through struggle and we can just go through struggle.
Yeah,
But are we going through struggle and are we saying, hey, like this is an opportunity to grow? And what am I doing to grow in that? And I would say that a lot of times we don't realize we're growing, but we are because we're immersing ourselves in healthy habits. For me, that looks like reading scripture, that looks like prayer, that looks like connecting with other people, that looks like remembering the calling that I'm sure God has on my life. If I can immerse myself in those things, like my progress will be evident to everybody that views my life.
yeah, and that was actually I was going to ask you. What do you do individually that pushes yourself to grow as a person, as a man of faith, as a father and husband? And you kind of touched on it right there. It's just for you, it's like getting in the Word in the mornings, kind of constantly redefining like who you are and what your purpose is and your calling, and working towards that. Is
Yep,
that
yep,
correct?
yeah. Also, too, this is something that I've been thinking on a lot lately. And in Mark 10:45, Jesus says that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And I think that in times in my life when I am going through a struggle, when I'm experiencing something challenging, very rarely do I want to do something for someone else because I'm always thinking about just myself. But we have to understand that the life that we've been called into by Jesus is a serving life. And so guess what? That's not like an on switch and an off switch. Like that's who we are. That's the life. If we share life with Jesus, then we serve. And in moments when I am thinking about myself, when I'm self-focused and selfish, Like, really what I need to be doing is looking to how can I benefit someone else? How can I help someone else? How can I make someone else better? Because I guarantee you this. Goes for anybody. When you serve someone else, like, not that we do it to walk away feeling better about ourselves, but regardless of what you're going through, you feel more happy, you feel more joyful, you feel more content, because guess what? Life's not all about you. And so understanding that, like, in those moments, these are healthy practices of like getting in God's word, praying, being with others, that encourages me. But what does that lead to? That should lead to continuing the same life in struggle that I do have when it's easy, right? Like, if I can be that person in the middle of struggle that I am when it's easy, guess what? I have character, I have integrity, and that's a steady person. The way there's one pastor that describes it like this. I think that this is what excellence is and what living a life of servanthood is he describes it as long obedience in the same direction, like the daily drip of obedience, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And I think that serving is a key component to that. Like, how, like, even when you are in a challenging time, a difficult time, God is going to put people in your life to serve. And if you're so concerned about yourself, guess what? You're going to neglect that opportunity. So getting in scripture, praying, connecting with others, but also, like, that's the time where you look out and you say, "Hey, I need to make someone better. I need to serve someone else. I need to help someone." That's the most important time to serve, is when it's difficult.
Absolutely. No, that's great stuff. I want to honor your time, and there's a few questions we want to get to too. Talk about a little bit about balance. Some people, believe balance is a myth. Some people think it's important. But how would you describe balance, and then also how do you find balance in someone's life?
So, um, balance is something that I'm learning still, but I think, especially with when you add two kids to the equation. But I think that balance, uh, it can be equated to priority. I think that you cannot think about balance without thinking about priority. Because if we think about balance, we think about job, we think about obligation. We're like, that's usually the first thing on the plate, right? That's the thing that I'm going to have to do. So what gets neglected? Emotional, spiritual growth, like time with family, time with my spouse. But if I put those first things first, guess what automatically probably becomes better as a result of it? My work life. C.S. Lewis talks about it in terms of like this: if you pursue second things, you're going to miss out on first things. But if you pursue first things, then second things get thrown in for free. And that is what I think the kingdom is based on. Jesus says it in Matthew 6:33, that if you seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then everything else will be added unto you. So, balance to me looks like pursuing kingdom things. It looks like pursuing God. It looks like pursuing his kingdom. And it looks like pursuing the relationships that he's graced me with, specifically my spouse and my kids. And if I align those things and prioritize those things, I think balance is going to find its way into my life almost naturally, supernaturally, in fact. That's
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the best responses to balance as a whole, and ideas behind it, because it's so true. You
yeah,
put first things first
yeah,
and focus on those things. The second things come in for free. I love that quote.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, you talked about focusing on God and what He's called you to do, and you talked a little bit about, there's one thing you mentioned, like spending a few minutes a day in social media instead of letting it kind of control your life, only limiting yourself to a few. What are some other practices that you can do to keep yourself not focused on what others are doing or what the world's thinking, but focus on what you're doing, and still be able to have that time to see what your friends are doing and whatnot, but not too much time? Like, what are some ways to go about that?
so I think that I find myself, like, on weeks that I teach, I intentionally try to stay off of social media. I don't do it I'm teaching this week, and I've done a terrible job of it this week. I'm just gonna be honest with you. But there's that healthy balance um, of understanding that I'm staying up to date with other people, that I'm connecting with other people, but also that's not really what determines me. And I think that you just have to know yourself, like know your limits, know what makes you tick. And if you feel like you're at a place in social media that's getting out of hand, that, like, for example, I've gone on social media fast, as most of us probably have all done before, and I will just find myself mindlessly picking up my phone and going to social media apps without thinking,
Yeah.
you know? And so, like, if I'm doing this mindlessly, like, then I think that the good nature of it is gone. I think that the helpfulness of it is gone. If I find myself just, this is the worst. And I'm just gonna be completely honest this morning. Like, there are times where my son is sitting there trying to talk to me, and guess what I'm doing? Scrolling through social media. If I find myself neglecting the personal relationships that God has put in my life for social relationships or social media, it's lost its benefit. It's lost its purpose. It's lost its benefit. So I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, um, it's almost like a limit. Like, I know when I've gone beyond the threshold. I know, and I think that being aware of that is important when it comes to, like, what our social media intake is. And so I think that sometimes I do have to just stop and say, for this week, I'm not doing it. For this week, I'm not getting on social media. Um, and that's good. Like, disconnecting from reality keeps us more in tune with our reality, if you think about it. And it gives us more because guess what? Like, in the times that we are allowing social media to drive what we think about, instead we're having to find other things that drive what we think about. And we can, we can replace social media with something that may not be healthy, or we can replace social media with something that is good. It's God's word. It's like, it how about this? Like, every time, if I pick up my phone, like, what would my life look like if I just instead put that down and just spent the time in prayer, communicating with God, connecting with God? I think that social media sometimes is just a bad replacement for good thinking. When we don't want to think, we don't want to even meditate or uh, focus on what God is doing in our hearts or who we are. And because of we pick up our phone, we allow that to drive who we are and what we're thinking about. And then, like, you've been on the social media rabbit hole. Like, we've all gone down that social media rabbit hole. We're like, how did I get here? But what did we neglect personally to go there? Like, and I think that, like, that's why, like, when I find social media driving my thoughts and me mindlessly getting on social media, that's when I know that it's time to hang it up a little bit.
That's a great point on social media, and also too the influences that affect you, whether we subconsciously know it or don't know it. Like the things we watch on TV, the relationships we have with our friends, like who are we hanging out with.
Yep.
All these things filter into what we think in our mind, whether
Yep.
we think it or not. They affect us, and so finding positive influences that affect you in a positive way rather than negative. And if there are things that are influencing you in a negative way, kind of talking about challenge and opportunity last time, basically using those things and saying, you know what, I'm going to try to make the most of this situation and use it for the better rather than for the worse. And so
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's making a change. Maybe it's just making a change in your mind. All those things, just being conscious of that, because
Yep.
it's not that it's all bad,
Nope.
but it's just the usage of it.
Hmm.
And like you
Yeah.
talked about, mindlessly just going to it, and being with your family or being with your friends or being in prayer. I mean, that's one of the best responses too, right there. Just using that time for something better, maybe, right?
Yeah. Paul says in Romans, he says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And so, like, transformation happens with our minds, right? Specifically interacting with God's word. And but we think about the other side of that, being conformed to something. Like, if what I'm allowing to drive my thoughts, or to direct my thoughts, is what's conforming me. It's what's changing me. And so if social media is my be all end all, like, that's what's conforming me, and I'm neglecting true transformation and growth as a result of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, real quick, what you now got two kids,
Mhm.
so now you've been a father for a little while. What does it mean to be a father and husband, and how do you go about that in the way that you want to?
I think that I think this is a typical response, but I say this to Kristen all the time, that being a dad is the toughest thing that I've ever done, but it's the most rewarding thing that I've ever done. And because of that, and the reason why is because um, I have to empty out myself every day. I, 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 I thought that I was a selfless person, and then I had kids, and then I realized very quickly how selfish I am, even with my little things, like my time, like my space. Um, Guess what? With kids, you have no time and you have no space, and um, you rut up against that uh, that idea of, like, this is me, this is my time. I have, like, my time here where I can go here and do that and think about these things. But then kids come along, they're like, they invade every space of your life, and very quickly you can either grow and adapt and transform and change and say, like, hey, I'm here to serve them, or you can continue to dig your heels in and say, no, this is me. And if you do that, you're just going to grow more frustrated and more angry, and you're going to neglect a fulfilling relationship, that and a gift. Like, scripture says that god that kids are gifts from God. And so I find myself when I think that I'm like, okay, I'm a selfless person now, God takes it a step further. And I would say that, like, He has just been dealing with my selfishness in the best way possible, but He's not leaving me there. Like, he's not just leaving me there. What He's doing is I think He's transforming it into selflessness and servanthood. So I would say that it's the toughest thing that I've ever done, but it's the most rewarding thing that I've ever done as well. Because He's making me a selfless person through it. That's the way I would say it.
Yeah, what about in regards to your marriage? Like, how do you have what are your advice to having a strong marriage
Yeah, I
while
would.
also having kids? So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
adds another element to it.
I would say that one cannot replace the other. That's the best way that I would put it. One cannot replace the other. Like, if God has given you kids, I believe that He's given you the grace to raise those kids. But guess what? God has also given you a spouse. And together, we see this in scripture, that it's man and woman that most perfectly, by God's grace, reflect God's image in the world. And so that should be first and foremost. And so the way that you um, are attached to one another, the way that you're growing with one another, the way that you are loving one another, that should be first and foremost. And guess what? That's going to bleed into how you raise your kids and how you love your kids as well. So, like, that is key. One cannot replace the other. But because God has given you both, guess what? He's going to give you the grace to do both. So this just means that, like, you don't have time for other things that you used to have time to do. Like, I don't have as much time to go play golf as much as as I used to. I don't have time to just go and have, random meetings, and just stay out all day, because guess what? Like, Kristen's at home with the kids, and I want to be aware of that, you know what, she's doing her best to hold the fort down, but God has put me in her life to help her out with that. So it's a juggling act, but it's not doing it in your own power. It's doing it by the grace that God gives you. And the more you come to those places where you're like, God, I don't think I have any more to give. Guess what? That's the place where He wants you to come to, because in those
Mm.
moments you understand His grace is sufficient, and He's going to give you the grace and what you need for that moment that He's put you in. So I would say, do not replace one with the other. Like, make sure that you are Like when our kids get down at 7 o'clock, this is our time. This is our time that we're going to, and it could be like watching a show together. It could be talking. It could be catching up on how the week is going. Like whatever time God gives you, take advantage of. So
Hmm.
don't allow one relationship to replace the other, because God has given you a spouse, and that's the way that He's going to reflect His image perfectly by His grace in your home and in your world.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're gonna wind down here and do a little fire round.
Yes.
So I'll read off a word and you can answer it however you want to answer it. So
Yes.
discipline.
Discipline is uncomfortable.
Favorite Greenville restaurant.
Okay, this is fresh off the press. Home
Okay.
team home team barbecue. Now, home team barbecue, I think, has the best cheeseburger in Greenville. But let me tell you, the barbecue at home team is nowhere near the barbecue that I had in Tulsa. Still
Okay.
the best, still the best to this day. Whenever I talk about Midwestern barbecue or barbecue in general to anybody, I always bring up the barbecue I had in Tulsa. So I mean, it's good for South Carolina standards. I'll say
Yeah, perfect. Integrity.
that. Is a journey. Integrity is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens through good times. It happens through bad times. It happens through tough times. It happens through unexpected times. But don't expect there. Don't expect to get there overnight. Um, I would say enjoy where God has placed you today and what He's doing in you today.
Favorite basketball experience.
Um, my junior year, we beat Vanderbilt on the road, and that team, the Vanderbilt team that we beat, actually went on to go to the Sweet 16. So it was a really good team. And we went on to lose to Davidson, who had Steph Curry in the semifinals of the SoCon championship. So we didn't get as far as Vandy got. But in the moment, this was the typical Furman experience. I'll never forget it. We beat Vanderbilt at night. It's Central Time. We're driving out of there about 10 or 11 Eastern Time probably, and we drive all the way through the night. We drive up to Timmins at 7:30, and I get out, unpack, and head to my 8 o'clock class. Like that, if that's not a Furman experience, I don't know what is. Like
Yeah.
you're beating Vanderbilt the night before, and then you're at 8 a.m. class the next day because you gotta get in the books. Like that's so Furman.
Yeah. Well, this isn't on here, but and you just brought up Steph Curry playing for Davidson. Did you ever believe that he would be doing what he's doing now after watching him at Davidson?
I'm gonna be honest. I did. I so when I saw him for the first time, I just was like, number one, like this guy is way more special than everybody knows. Um, Now, the first game I ever saw him play, he came out of the locker room, and I'd heard so much about him. I'd seen him a little bit on film. But he came out of the locker room, and I mean, he looked like he was 150 pounds soaking wet. And I
Yeah.
was like, "That's the guy. Like, that's the one." And then, like a 30 ball later, like I was like, okay, he's the one.
He's
Like
the
he's
one.
the guy. But as you watched him develop and grow, the thing I was always most impressed about, like I would do, like when we were playing Davidson, is I would just watch him the whole time. The way that he would move off the ball, like his feel, his instincts, like the natural basketball instincts that guy had. The way that he had learned to get his shot off. I mean, like his father, Dell, was an NBA guy, so he grew up around the game. You just felt like he had all the tools. Um, but like MVP status, like top tier of the league. Like I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I saw that. I just knew that he was going. I knew he was going to be in the league because I've been around the SoCon for several years, and I was like, there's no one that's even come close to how good this guy is. So that was a really neat experience, being able to experience Steph Curry at Davidson College and to see him grow and develop into the player he is today. That's probably I would say that as one B actually of like
Okay.
beating
There's
Vanderbilt and then like seeing Steph Curry like
playing
live.
against him. Yeah, playing against him or you being on the staff. Yeah, for sure. That's a good one B. I just had to add that in there too because I know that would be an interesting question. But Okay, back to the fire round. It all comes down to.
Desires. It all comes down to desires. I think that at the end of the day, we all do what we desire the most. Like that, like you ask someone, hey, why did you do that? What's their answer? Because I wanted to.
Mm,
Like
yeah,
we all do what we desire the most. And I think that unfortunately a lot of times when we think about, this goes back to our growth conversation, our change conversation. We think about just changing our actions when there's really something else deeper intact that we need to look at, and that is our heart. That is what our affections are tied to. um, just something as simple as anger. Think about when you get angry about something. Why did you get angry about that? It's because you didn't get what you wanted. And so like if we think about like just dealing with our anger, let's think about this. Like, do I have the right expectations for my life? Do I have do am I thinking about, like, do I have the right goals in mind? And if I don't, if I find myself getting angry because someone's getting in the way of that, I'm getting angry at them because I'm not getting what I want, then maybe I need to reorient my desires, and maybe I need to reorient my goals. And so I would say it all comes down to desires, because everybody does what they desire the most.
absolutely. Do you have a certain piece of advice, best piece of advice you've ever received?
Um, best piece of advice that I've ever received? That's a really good question. I saw this on the I passed over this, but I didn't think a lot about it. So this is like a real processing moment for me. Best piece of advice. Um, seek first. Seek first above all else. Like that's what I find myself like reorienting myself back to constantly, is like when I'm frustrated, when I'm angry, it's because I'm not seeking first the right things. I'm not seeking first the things of God. And so, like, those are two simple words um, that I always come back to, and that's just seek first. In other words, seek first things like we were talking about, or seek the right things. Um, that's what I would boil everything down to in my life. Of like, that's what I always come back to: is seek first. Am I seeking the right things?
That's great. This podcast is called Building Excellence. What does building excellence mean to you?
It's the daily drip of obedience. It is long obedience in the same direction. Am I doing today what God has called me to do, what God has put in front of me, and am I doing it well? And like, well is a subjective term, right? But I think at the end of the day, we all know whether or not we went after everything that we had with everything that we had. Like everything, every opportunity that we had before us that day, we know in our heart of hearts, like that we did or we didn't. And so it sounds subjective, but guess what? Like we all know whether or not we exhausted the possibilities and the opportunities that God gave us that day.
Yeah. That's so good, Nate. Also, as I was sitting here, I was thinking about the fire round, and I was going to ask you what your favorite chair was as I saw you swivel. And so, oh, yeah, if you can't watch the video, we got a nice cow skin chair in the back there, which is, I love it. I love it.
It keeps me connected with my Tulsa fam.
There you go. Yes. That's perfect. We need to somehow get you a Tulsa chair out there for you. But anyway, thanks so much for being on the show, Nate. You're just a guy that you're making an impact wherever you've been. You made an extreme impact on my life, and obviously, people that get to watch this and listen to it, they're going to see why that you've done that, and not only to my life, but many many people as a pastor, as a husband, now as a father, and as a coach, and now helping athletes and coaches. So thank you for being on the show. Thank you for doing what you do, and you're absolutely living in the element that God intends for you to live, in my opinion. So it's just a blast to have you on the show. I wish we could do longer, but maybe we'll have you on some other time. So
Let's do it again, and let's do like just the whole time, just a fire round, right? Just like,
fire, yeah,
just ask me questions over and over. No, I'm just kidding. This has
yeah,
been this has been really good for me. This has been really good to process. Your questions are fantastic, and I hope that this podcast, not just this one particular one, but this podcast in general, um, motivates people, equips people to live the life that God has called them to. I know it will. I know it will. I've always been inspired by um, just how hard you go after life, and I think that this is an example of it. So I'm proud of you, brother, and love you and Chan, and I'm excited to see what comes from this podcast.
Thanks, Nate. Love you as well. I appreciate that. If someone wants to kind of follow you, reach out, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Or you on social media, or what's the best way to get in touch?
Instagram and Twitter, and it's just at Nate Muse. Pretty simple.
Okay, but he might be on Instagram and social media leave for a little bit too. So just so you know.
So if I don't get back to you, hey, listen,
That's why.
I'm on
Yeah,
social media fast.
you heard it straight from the podcast. So, all right, Nate. Thanks so much for being on the show. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy.